And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas, gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, it's March the 2nd, 61st day of the year. Just 304 days remain the year's over with, and we'll start a new one. Holidays and observances. Dr. Seuss Day. If you ever grew up listening to the stories about Dr. Seuss, you know exactly who I'm talking about. National Egg McMuffin Day, Casimir Pulaski Day, and Toddle Waddle, which is a interesting name. It's a fundraising walking event. Yearly walking is a spectacle unlike any other because it's aimed at parents and children under 5. Watching the Toddle Waddle, you'll see some children confidently strolling along. You also witness others who can barely ambulate. It's something you won't quickly forget. Esther Fast. It's let's see, it's a special day in the Jewish faith. It remembers when Queen Esther called on her people to fast and pray before she risked her life to speak to the king. They didn't turn to weapons or arguments, they turned to God. Through fasting, they open their hearts and place their trust in Him and ask for mercy and guidance. The World Tennis Day, World Teen Mental Wellness Day, International Rescue Cat Day, bring home a furry friend in need, National Read Across America Day, Fun Facts About Names Day, National Old Stuff Day, Texas Independence Day. It's day marks a significant event in 1836 when Texas declared itself independent from Mexico. It's a day of pride and reflection on the state's unique history. In fact, the leading up to the Declaration of Independence had such things as the Alamo, and I'll be doing a story about the truth about the Alamo. National Banana Cream Pie Day, James Roland Webster Day, Adelaide Fringe Teen Tech Week, Peace Corps Week, Self-Storage Week, Purim, which is something I wanted to make sure I covered. It's a burst with energy with Jewish holiday filled with costumes and laughter and treats. Streets come alive with parades and music and dancing. Children dress up as heroes and queens or whatever sparks their imagination. Families gather to share sweets and stories. The atmosphere is electric, blending joy with tradition. It's a time when communities unite in celebration, embracing the spirit of festivity. At its heart, honors a tale of courage and unity. Story from the book of Esther tells of a time when the Jewish people faced great danger. Through bravery and cleverness, they overcame the threat. Today, Purim stands as a symbol of triumph over adversity. And in this time of great distress, frankly, there's a major war going on right now. Termite Awareness Week, Read Across America Week, Make Mine Chocolate, No More Week. Domestic violence is a serious issue that affects countless individuals and families. National Professional Pet Sitters Week, Women in Aviation Week, Women in Construction Week, Read an ebook week, and I certainly recommend you do that because I've got a bunch of them that have been published on Amazon Kindle and on hudnallfiles.com. Butcher's Week, British Pie Week, National Consumer Protection Week, World Orphan Week, National Invest in Veterans Week, and I'm certainly behind that. School Breakfast Week, Dental Assistant Recognition Week, Newspaper and Education Week, Chocolate Chip Cookie Week, National Ghostwriters Week, done a little bit of that, National Scoot to School Week, Will Eisner Week, the godfather of graphic novels, revolutionized the comic industry with his iconic characters and stunning artwork, Hearing Awareness Week, National Aplastic Anemia and MDS Awareness Week, Celebrate Your Name Week, Cheerleading Week, World's Matter Week, National School Social Work Week, famous people born on this date, Bryce Dallas Howard, Method Man, Rebel Wilson, Becky G, the one and only Dr. Seuss, and Desi Arnaz. Well, if you've been listening to the news, you know that Saturday, Israel and the U.S. bombed Iran, destroyed most of the Republican Guard command structure, as well as, according to both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, killed the Ayatollah. But it's not just solidified in Iran. In fact, 3 U.S. warplanes were shot down by Kuwaiti air defenses. That's according to CENTCOM. Pilots bailed out in a friendly fire incident. The U.S. Air Force F-15E Strike Eagles were shot down in a friendly fire incident over Kuwait late yesterday during active combat operations tied to Operation Epic Fury. Aircraft mistakenly engaged by Kuwaiti air defenses amid a complex battle environment that included attacks from Iranian aircraft, ballistic missiles, and drones. All 6 aircrew members safely ejected, quickly recovered and reported to be in stable condition. Kuwaiti officials have acknowledged the incident, and investigations underway to determine the cause. CENTCOM said it's an ongoing story. Additional details are going to be released. Well, this is day 3 of Operation Epic Fury. Iran is carrying out retaliatory strikes. A lot of ballistic missiles are flying through the air. Tel Aviv analysts shelters from 30 missile sirens in 48 hours. But they say Iran is not going to recover from this attack. For the past 48 hours in Tel Aviv have been unlike anything seen before. That's according to a leading security analyst. As sirens blared amid missile threats following Operation Epic Fury and U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. According to Kobe Michael, a senior researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies and the Mizgave Institute, he said, "We're facing a biblical event, nothing less." Like many Israelis, Michael said he spent hours in reinforced rooms during ongoing barrage, adding he was very experienced in this. But this all requires time and determination, and I do hope that Trump will also have them both, he said. Speaking shortly after the president released a video stating the military operation would continue until all our objectives are achieved. The Iran conflict has expanded as Israel strikes against Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. President Trump says all U.S. attacks on Iran will continue Monday as Israel expanded the conflict by attacking Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. Operation Epic Fury has already taken a heavy toll on Tehran, eliminating Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and other top officials, leading to a succession crisis. Israel and the U.S. launched a massive joint air operation against Iran Saturday. The attacks have already left major leaders dead, including Iranian Supreme Leader. President Trump warned on Sunday against Iranian retaliation over the U.S. and Israeli strikes. He said if Iran were to hit very hard, they'd meet with a force that's never been seen before. Joint military operations expected to carry on for days. Officials tell Fox News Israel is targeting Iranian leadership. The U.S. is targeting military targets and the ballistic missile sites that pose an imminent threat. Pentagon confirmed the U.S. deployed B-2 stealth bombers armed with 2,000-pound bombs as part of the campaign. Those bombs, of course, are known as bunker busters, and apparently they did the job. Well, radical Shiite clerics on American soil preached a prophetic showdown with the U.S. The story's out of Manassas, Virginia. For many, the war with Iran, the killing of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, might be seen like the climactic end to a long, brutal reign of terror by the theological clerics who've run the country since 1979. And a Fox News digital investigation shows that certain hardline Shiite ideologues, including in the U.S., this is not an ending, but a prophetic showdown that will usher in the arrival of the Mahdi, a Messiah, according to Islamic theology. We're talking about the end times, don't you know? In this prophecy, the Mahdi will emerge to battle Dajjal, the Islamic equivalent of the Antichrist, in the final battle for Armageddon. But many of these ideologues, President Trump is actually Dajjal, the Antichrist. At a recent Friday sermon at a local Shiite mosque in Georgia, Virginia, an imam closed the prayer with an earnest plea before war broke out in Iran. He said, "May Allah destroy all the non-believers," or Kafirun, or Munafiqun, using Arabic words that refer to non-believers and hypocrites. He asked that this victory before the arrival of the Mahdi. Well, I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you're not happy here, there's the door. Well, it's called a whoop, according to a CEO. Rejected a security risk claim about Susie Wiles. Whoop is a wearable fitness company valued at about $3.6 billion, produces subscription-based trackers that monitor users' overall health. After online speculation suggested a top Trump administration official breached U.S. security protocols, the founder and CEO of Whoop stepped in to identify the wearable device at the center of the controversy. While the circulated meeting photo of White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles prompted social media users speculate that a smartwatch, typically restricted in sensitive environments due to recording connectivity capabilities, was visible on her wrist. Critics quickly raised concerns about potential cybersecurity implications. Yes, the smartwatches have unbelievable capabilities. I've worn one for quite a while, and I could actually shut down my system with it. Well, Kennedy Air is back in the news. Jack Schlossberg, JFK's grandson, has defended the aggressive post about J.D. Vance's wife. He's a Democratic congressional candidate, defended targeting Vice President Vance's wife in a social media post on CBS News Sunday morning. Schlossberg, the grandson of the late former President John F. Kennedy, was asked by CBS about his social media posts that have been described as creepy and polarizing, particularly regarding Vance's wife, Usha. One post, Schlossberg superimposed his face on one of Usha Vance's children. He denied that he was crossing a line by involving the vice president's wife. Well, the mere fact that you're a Kennedy doesn't make you above the law. Over 50 people arrested as anti-ICE protesters allegedly hurl rocks at Minneapolis officers during a demonstration. At least 54 people were arrested Sunday during a protest against Immigration and Customs Enforcement outside the Bishop Henry Whipple Federal Building in Minneapolis. The Hennepin County Sheriff's Office said 38 individuals were cited and released, and one person was booked into jail. Minnesota State Patrol confirmed an additional 15 arrests. In a statement posted to Facebook, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office said deputies issued dispersal orders against protesters allegedly blocking streets and access to local businesses. Scattered glass in the roadway and threw rocks and chunks of ice and water bottles at law enforcement. The Sheriff's Office said this morning our deputies issued dispersal orders in an unlawful assembly outside the Whipple building after individuals blocked roadways, blocked access to local businesses, dumped glass into the street, and threw rocks and ice chunks and water bottles at law enforcement, creating a serious public safety hazard. Said arrests are still being made. Officials emphasize that peaceful protest is constitutionally protected, but criminal behavior will not be tolerated. Well, Prince William is ready to go to war with the press over Kate Middleton's topless photo scandal. Prince William is very unhappy with the press. They secretly photographed Kate Middleton topless while sunbathing on vacation. Claim comes from Russell Myers, royal editor of the Daily Mirror and author of the new book, William and Catherine, examines how the Prince and Princess of Wales have weathered the storms that have rocked the House of Windsor. He said it became a lengthy legal battle for the couple. When it began in 2012, was a fight the future king was determined to pursue relentlessly and see through to the very end to protect his wife. Well, the Myers said Williams always had a difficult relationship with the press, not necessarily as public as his brother, but he was clear that he didn't want to go back to the really destructive period of his parents' relationship, which had a huge effect on him and Harry. Well, 5 Virginia congressmen are saying Democrats are rejecting voters to gerrymander the state. Virginia voters settled the redistricting question in 2020. Nearly 2/3 of Virginians amended their constitution to create an independent redistricting commission and take map drawing power away from politicians. That message was unmistakable. Stop the gerrymandering. Stop letting politicians choose our voters. Well, Democrats, of course, applauded that reform. House of Delegates Speaker Don Scott praised fairness and transparency. The days of going to the polls to have an impartial election are long in the past. Well, police have stumbled upon an ancient shipwreck amid a routine patrol. Of course, they're keeping that location secret to deter looters. This routine patrol in the Ionian Sea led Italian authorities on a remarkable discovery. A late Roman merchant shipwreck still carrying its cargo of amphora. In a translated statement provided to Fox, the Guardia di Finanza said the ship was found off the coast of Apulia, the heel of Italy. That's the Guardia di Finanza, Italy's financial police force, said the ship was discovered in June of 2025. Though officials kept the find confidential until now. Apparently, what's on it could be quite valuable. According to Naked Gun director, he thinks the Babylonian Bee is funnier than Saturday Night Live. Legendary Airplane and Naked Gun director David Zucker argued in a recent interview that the decline of NBC's Saturday Night Live led to the rise of the satirical news site The Babylon Bee. While appearing on Mike Rowe's podcast, The Way I Heard It, February 17th, Zucker was asked by Rowe what he thinks led to the rise of the Babylon Bee in recent years. He said, I think it's a lot because of what's happened to Saturday Night Live. They were committed to an ideology rather than to jokes. Babylon Bee's funnier, and I've gotten to know some of the guys, and I subscribe. I love it. Makes me laugh. They're so good because their targets are better, you know. People don't watch comedy specials to be given political indoctrination. They watch because it's funny. And unfortunately, Saturday Night Live has decided it's going to preach. Well, When even Obama calls your homeless situation an atrocity, it's time for a new solution. One of the wealthiest places on earth, thousands living in tent cities on the streets of Los Angeles. That's an atrocity even former President Barack Obama recently acknowledged on a podcast. He slammed the moral failure of allowing people to languish without real help while noting that encampments downtown are a losing political strategy. He demanded policies that recognize their full humanity and provide genuine resources for success. It's not simply a moral failure, it's a structural one. I know during the time I lived in California, we saw the beginnings of the homeless encampments. Well, ChatGPT, which is a very well-known website, could miss your serious medical emergency, according to a new study. The artificial intelligence has been touted as a boon to healthcare, but a new study has revealed its potential shortcomings when it comes to giving medical advice. In January, OpenAI launched ChatGPT Health, a medical-focused version of the popular chatbot tool. The company introduced the tool as a dedicated experience that securely brings your health information and GPT's intelligence together. They help you feel informed, prepared, and confident navigating your health. Researchers at the Icahn School of Medicine in Mount Sinai have found that the tool failed to recommend emergency care for a significant number of serious medical cases. The study, published in a journal, Nature Medicine, February 23rd, aimed to explore how ChatGPT Health, which is reported to have about 40 million users daily, handles situations where people are asking whether to seek emergency care. Right now, no independent body evaluates these products before they reach the public, according to author Ashwin Ramaswamy, MD, instructor in urology at the Icahn School of Medicine in Mount Sinai in New York City. We wouldn't accept that for a medication or a medical device. We wouldn't accept it for a product that tens of millions of people are using to make health decisions. Well, we're moving into a new era, folks. I will say, during my experience with AI, it's been highly effective, but it's not the end-all, be-all by any means. Well, it's to be expected. Those experts who call themselves Hollywood stars are condemning President Trump over the Iranian military action. Others are praising promises kept. President Trump drew condemnation from several celebrities after Saturday's daylight attack on the Iranian regime. One actress mocked the Department of War's rebrand as ironic, and others accused Trump of failing his campaign promise to stop wars. The Carrie Coon, actress from The Gilded Age, wrote on X, the Department of War. They weren't kidding about that. Frequent Trump critic John Cusack, Rosie O'Donnell. Yeah, there's always going to be Rosie involved. Mark Ruffalo, Jack White, and Jane Fonda. Hanoi Jane herself also chimed in after the U.S. and Israel launched offensive measures against the Islamic Republic. Killed a number of the country's leaders, including Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He says that Trump starts a wag the dog war to distract from the Epstein and do Netanyahu's bidding, who's lobbied for this for over 30 years. Now, the problem is, just because you may be known as a Hollywood star doesn't make you the end-all, be-all. And quite often, they talk to their fourth point of contact. Well, there was a mass shooting in Austin, Texas over the weekend. The suspect wore the Iranian flag shirt during the attack, according to sources. When they went to his apartment, they found an Iranian flag and photos of regime leaders in the apartment of the gunman. The shooting took place outside a bar in Austin, Texas. Flag and images were discovered during a search at the suspect's home, according to CBS News, after the shooting early Sunday morning. That left 3 people dead and 14 wounded. And as I said, the shooter was wearing a sweatshirt that said "Property of Allah" and an undershirt featuring a Iranian flag when he carried out the attack. Well, if you want to support Iran so badly, airports are still open. I invite you to make use of them. All right. Friday, we were talking about the Oklahoma City bombing. We're going to finish up that segment. As I said at that time, in the chaotic days after the bombing, witnesses reported seeing McVeigh with another man when renting the Ryder truck. Composite sketches were released, and the identified man became known as John Doe Number 2. And for weeks, federal authorities treated him as a real suspect. Until they didn't. FBI later stated the witnesses were mistaken. Individuals either misidentified or really didn't exist. The sketch quietly disappeared from public focus. But there was still the question, why were so many people consistent? Why were early investigative bulletins urgent about locating him? And why did the narrative narrow so quickly? Was John Doe Number 2 a case of mistaken identity and a national crisis, or was it somebody who didn't fit the prosecutorial theory? Well, the problem is the prosecutors come up with a theory, and all the evidence has to support the theory. If it doesn't, it's quite often just discounted. Well, investigators briefly focused on Elohim City, white separatist compound in eastern Oklahoma. Several known extremists live there, including individuals tied to militia movements and Aryan separatist groups. Phone records show McVeigh had contact with individuals associated with the compound shortly before the bombing. And federal authorities interviewed residents. And then suddenly, their interest in it cooled. The government maintained that there was insufficient evidence to charge anybody from Elohim City. But critics of the government's handling of the case have long asked, why were some leads not aggressively pursued? Why were certain informants reportedly present within the community? And did federal intelligence already have eyes inside Elohim City? What became one of the enduring shadows of the investigation, close enough to raise suspicion, distant enough to avoid indictment. That's the problem when an investigation is closely held. Individuals make decisions that certainly affect the outcome. Well, the 1990s were saturated with federal undercover operations targeting extremist groups. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF, the FBI, other agencies had numerous informants embedded in militia and white supremacist circles. And this leads to the most uncomfortable question. If McVeigh moved within that world, how did the bombing go undetected? Was there a failure of intelligence? Was there a missed warning? Was an informant who knew too little or too much? Several later lawsuits and congressional inquiries attempted to probe the extent of federal foreknowledge. None produced conclusive proof of complicity. But absence of proof is not proof of absence. Oklahoma City bombing sits at a crossroads of tragedy and suspicion. Case where the official version is documented, but the peripheral questions never fully disappear. Because of the scale of trauma in Oklahoma City, the trial was moved to Denver. The federal government wanted distance from a community still raw with grief. Jury selection alone took weeks. Prosecution team led by Joseph Hartzler and Beth Wilkinson built a case designed to eliminate ambiguity. The strategy was simple. Produce overwhelming evidence. They presented rental records for the Ryder truck, fertilizer purchase receipts, storage locker components matching explosive residue, eyewitness testimony placing McVeigh near the Mirror building, and Nichols' admissions and cooperation. The government emphasized motive. This was retaliation for Waco and Ruby Ridge, a calculated act of ideological war. McVeigh didn't deny responsibility. Instead, through his demeanor and later statements, he leaned into martyrdom imagery. Prosecution focused not on ideology, but on mechanics. Building the bomb, parking the truck, and walking away. The courtroom atmosphere was tense but controlled. The nation watched closely. Survivors testified. First responders described the devastation. The government sought not only a conviction, but they sought the death penalty. Well, if McVeigh was the public face of rage, Terry Nichols was the quiet architect in the background. Now, Nichols' role was less theatrical, but deeply consequential. He helped acquire bomb components, assisted in mixing materials, and allowed his property to be used for storage and experimentation. During his federal trial, prosecutors sought to show Nichols was not a passive participant, but a full partner in construction and planning. Nichols attempted to portray himself as manipulated, pulled along by McVeigh's intensity. The physical evidence and record suggested sustained involvement. Unlike McVeigh, Nichols did not receive the death penalty at the federal level. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Later in Oklahoma State Court, he received 161 consecutive life sentences, one for each victim. The difference in sentencing between the two men sparked debate. A number of questions came up, of course. Was Nichols equally culpable? Did his lower profile influence the jury? Was McVeigh's courtroom posture a factor? Well, justice was delivered, but not without complexity. It was June 11, 2001. Timothy McVeigh was executed by lethal injection at the Federal Corrections Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. That was the first federal execution in nearly 4 decades. McVeigh declined spiritual counseling, reportedly showed no visible remorse. His final statement wasn't spoken. Instead, he left behind a handwritten copy of the poem Invictus. For some, the execution closed a chapter. For others, of course, it didn't. Survivors and victims' families were divided. Some felt justice had been finally served. Others felt execution was too easy. Life imprisonment would have forced him to live with the consequences of his actions. That execution didn't silence every question. A number of broader issues still remained. Number one, could it have been prevented? Were all co-conspirators truly identified? Were intelligence warnings missed? Did investigative blind spots contribute? In the end, Oklahoma City bombing reshaped domestic terrorism law, federal investigative practices, and building security nationwide. But history doesn't rest on verdicts alone. It rests on whether every question was asked and whether every answer was pursued. By the time Timothy McVeigh was executed in 2001, the official case appeared sealed. Convictions were secured. Sentences were delivered. Appeals were exhausted. But in the years that followed, defense attorneys and journalists continued to probe one persistent issue: disclosure. In 2001, just weeks before McVeigh's execution, the FBI revealed that thousands of documents hadn't been turned over to the defense during the trial. The Bureau described it as an administrative oversight. The documents were ultimately reviewed, and the courts determined they didn't alter the outcome. Still, the late disclosure fed a already simmering suspicion among critics. What else hadn't been fully examined? In large federal prosecutions, discovery errors are not unheard of, but in cases of this magnitude, the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history, even small procedural lapses fuel doubt. The government maintained there was no conspiracy to withhold evidence, but in high-profile cases, confidence is fragile. Throughout the 1990s, federal agencies were deeply embedded in militia and extremist circles. Informants operated inside radical compounds. Undercover operations monitored anti-government rhetoric. McVeigh wasn't operating in isolation from that ecosystem. This raises the enduring question: was the bombing a failure of intelligence or a failure to act? There's no confirmed evidence that federal authorities had specific foreknowledge of the Oklahoma City attack. Multiple investigations have concluded that while agencies monitored extremist groups broadly, they didn't identify McVeigh's plot in time. But critics argue that agents perhaps underestimated the threat. Warning signs were dismissed. Did interagency communication failures play a role? In the aftermath, federal counterterrorism practices shifted dramatically. Information sharing improved. Domestic extremism gained a renewed focus. Oklahoma City became both a tragedy and a catalyst. But to fully understand the bombing, you have to understand the climate. The early 1990s were marked by Ruby Ridge in 1992, the Waco siege in 1993, expanding militia movements, and rising distrust of federal authorities. McVeigh didn't invent anti-government sentiment. He radicalized within it. The Murrah building bombing was, in his own framing, an act of retaliation for Waco, timed deliberately to coincide with its anniversary. And the danger wasn't just one man. It was the collision of ideology, grievance, and access to destructive capability. Oklahoma City exposed how quickly extremist rhetoric could escalate into catastrophic violence. The bombing killed 168 people, including 19 children. It injured hundreds more. It scarred a city permanently. In the aftermath, federal buildings nationwide increased security. Domestic terrorism laws expanded. Law enforcement adopted more aggressive surveillance of extremist groups. Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996 was enacted. For some, Oklahoma City justified stronger federal authority. For others, it marked the beginning of expanded governmental reach into civil liberties. The case also shaped how America would respond to future acts of terrorism, including those on September 11, 2001. The bombing remains a case study in radicalism, intelligence gaps, investigative power, and the balance between security and liberty. Timothy McVeigh was executed. Terry Nichols remains imprisoned at this time. But the deeper question about domestic extremism and the institutions meant to prevent it remain relevant decades later. History records the verdict. History also records the warnings. The official record of the Oklahoma City bombing is very clear. Timothy McVeigh built and detonated a truck bomb outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building April 19, 1995. Terry Nichols assisted in its construction and logistics. Both were convicted in federal court. McVeigh was executed in 2001. Nichols remains in prison for life. This is a legal conclusion. But history is not written solely in verdicts, it's written in aftermath. Oklahoma City bombing exposed something far larger than one man's rage. It revealed how grievance can metastasize when ideology, isolation, and opportunity converge. It demonstrated how domestic extremism can operate in plain sight, fueled by rhetoric and emboldened by echo chambers long before social media amplified such movements. And the case also left a residue. Not a proven conspiracy, but of persistent questions. Why were early leads like John Doe No. 2 abandoned so quickly? Why were certain communities investigated intensely and then quietly released from focus? Why did discovery errors surface so late in the case? And such a magnitude, thousands of pages. Will intelligence signals missed or just misunderstood? Now, none of these questions overturn the convictions, but they do remind us that large investigation is not immune to imperfection. In the years that followed, the United States fundamentally altered its security posture. Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act reshaped federal review. Building security hardened. Surveillance authorities expanded. Interagency cooperation intensified. Oklahoma City became both a tragedy and a turning point. And yet there's another lesson, quieter but just as important. The bombing didn't emerge from nowhere. It grew in soil already fertilized with distrust and anger and narratives of government betrayal, and McVeigh didn't create that atmosphere, he just weaponized it. That reality forces an uncomfortable reflection. Prevention requires more than law enforcement. It requires cultural vigilance. It requires recognizing radicalism before it crystallizes into violence. The Murrah Building and Memorial now stands where devastation once defined the skyline. 168 empty chairs mark the lives lost. 19 of them are smaller. They're the ones for the children, don't you know? Those chairs are not political statements, not ideological arguments. They're reminders. Investigative history demands honesty. It demands acknowledgement of established facts. Also demands that we resist the temptations to declare every chapter closed simply because a courtroom has spoken. Justice was delivered, but the warnings remain. Domestic extremism is not an artifact of the 1990s. It's a recurring undercurrent in American history. When it resurfaces when fear and grievance and absolutism converge. Oklahoma City bombing is not just a case file, it's a caution. And history, if it teaches us anything, teaches us this. When warning signs are dismissed as rhetoric, the consequences can be irreversible. Well, one thing I want to close this segment with is looking at the documented timeline of events. Now, this has been compiled from court records, FBI investigative summaries, and congressional materials and contemporaneous news reporting. In 1992 and 93, that's been referred to as the ideological catalyst period. August of 1992, we had Ruby Ridge in Idaho. Federal standoff results in the death of Randy Weaver's wife and son. They were standing in the doorway of a cabin when they were shot by a sniper. The incident became a rallying cry within militia and anti-government circles. February to April 1993, we had the Waco siege in Texas. Federal agencies lay siege to the Branch Davidian compound. April 19, 1993, the compound burns. 76 people die. April 19th becomes symbolically significant within extremist communities. 1994 was what you might consider the planning phase. September 94, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols began acquiring bomb components, including ammonium nitrate fertilizer and racing fuel. Late 1994, Nichols purchases fertilizer under aliases. Storage units are rented for bomb-making materials. Early 1995 is what's considered the final preparation period. In March of 1995, additional bomb components are assembled. Materials are stored in Harrington, Kansas. April 17, 1995, McVeigh rented a Ryder truck in Junction City, Kansas. April 18, 1995, the bomb is assembled inside the rented truck. April 19, 1995, was the day of the bombing. 9:02 a.m. Central Time. The Ryder truck detonated outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. 168 people killed. 19 of those were children. Over 600 others were injured. At about 10:20 in the morning, April 19th, Timothy McVeigh stopped Oklahoma State Trooper Charlie Hanger for driving without a license plate and is arrested for carrying a concealed weapon. Now, I have to raise a question at this point. You're in the process of carrying out one of the largest domestic terrorist act this country's ever seen, and you're driving a car without a license plate? That's waving a flag saying, "Arrest me, please." I have an issue with that. April 21st, 1995, McVeigh's identified as the prime suspect after the truck's axle is traced to the Ryder rental agency. August 1995, a federal grand jury indicts Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols on multiple counts, including the use of a weapon of mass destruction. 1996, the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act is signed into law, expanding federal authority and limiting habeas corpus appeals. 1997, that's when the federal trial took place. April 1997, McVeigh's trial begins in Denver. The venue was changed due to pretrial publicity. June 2nd, 1997, McVeigh's convicted on all counts. I mean, there was so much rhetoric. I think had the Pope been accused, he'd have been convicted. June 13th, 1997, McVeigh sentenced to death. 1998, Nichols is sentenced. He got life imprisonment without parole at the federal level. 2001, June 11th, 2001, was the execution of Timothy McVeigh, executed by lethal injection at the Federal Correction Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. Well, the bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building claimed 168 lives, as I've said several times. And 19 of those victims were children attending the America's Kids Daycare Center inside the Murrah Building. Oklahoma City National Memorial now stands on the site. It has 168 empty chairs, one for each victim. There's a reflecting pool marking where the building once stood. And there's what's called the Gates of Time, inscribed with 901 and 903. The minute before and the minute after the explosion. The names of the victims are preserved in public record and memorial archives. Rather than to reproduce the full list as part of this presentation, you're encouraged to consult the official Oklahoma City National Memorial Archives for the complete and respectfully maintained roster of those that died in the bombing. Each name represents a parent, a child, a federal employee, a first responder, civilian conducting ordinary business. The bombing was not abstract. It was personal. The memorial stands not as an argument, but as a witness. Now, in putting together this show, we looked at court records, United States versus Timothy McVeigh, federal court proceedings, 1997. United States versus Terry Lynn Nichols, federal and Oklahoma State court records. Sentencing transcripts from the U.S. District Court, District of Colorado. A number of government publications, FBI investigative summaries, which are publicly released materials, congressional hearing records relating to domestic terrorism and extremism from the mid-1990s, Department of Justice press releases and sentencing statements, Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, a number of books and works. Jihad Joe from J.M. Berger, Lou Michel and Dan Herbeck, American terrorist, Congressional Research Service reports on domestic terrorism, some media and contemporary reporting. The Oklahoman had a number of stories from 1995 to 2001. New York Times archival reporting, Associated Press reporting, PBS Frontline investigative segments, Oklahoma City National Memorial official publications, survivor testimony archives. Now, we made an effort to distinguish between Oklahoma City National Memorial official publications, survivor testimony archives, and we also made an effort to distinguish between court-established fact and investigative debate, not a public record reporting. Now, when the questions remain, we present them as questions. But in a court case, quite often they're presented as conclusions, which can, of course, leave a lot of confusion in its wake. The interesting thing about Oklahoma City bombing, after all the rhetoric it was spewed about places like Elohim City and a number of other separatist encampments, they were just ignored after that, which absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. Now, something of the scale of Oklahoma City bombing, you would think no stone would be left unturned about the prosecution to make the case. But actually, that's not true. In any prosecution, there are paths that are followed that eventually are determined to not be worth continuing the time, and they're just ignored. In a case like Oklahoma City, I would submit that that's a bad mistake. Not only does the trial create the record, but it also shows what the record missed. Now, what investigative avenues have been opened up by those thousands of pages of materials that the FBI admitted they hadn't turned over to the defense? In any criminal trial, the defense is entitled to see everything the prosecution has. In this particular case, it was a clear violation of the right of due process of McVeigh and Nichols, but such was the public feeling at that point. There was no way the case could have been postponed or dismissed for lack of due process. I think the public would have put together very quickly a lynch mob to go after McVeigh had he been turned loose. Now, I had a number of comments about some of the shows that I'm doing, such as the Oklahoma City bombing. I'll revisit these dark periods in our history. For a lot of Americans, the story ended with the execution of McVeigh and the locking up of Nichols. But history is rarely that simple. We're not trying to challenge the tragedy, diminish the suffering, or absolve those found guilty. I mean, the evidence presented at the trial established that McVeigh's role in constructing and detonating the bomb. We're not attacking that record at all. We're examining something much more narrow, at the same time broader. We're questioning what the investigators initially pursued that later disappeared from public discussion. What leads were explored and which were quietly abandoned? Why did certain early witness accounts conflict with later conclusions? And what role, if any, did confidential informants or malicious surveillance operations play in the broader context of the case? These are not accusations. These are documented questions raised by journalists and defense attorneys, and in some cases, members of Congress. If it was important enough to raise the issue, it would be important enough, I would think, to follow to a logical conclusion, not just ignore and go on to something else. Nearly over 3 decades later, thousands of pages of records still remain sealed. Investigative threads remain contested. Debates over John Doe number 2 are still persisting. Former agents and researchers still disagree over the completeness of the official record. We're not reopening wounds. What we're trying to do is understand how major national cases are built and whether the public record always reflects the full investigative landscape. Now, the suppressed files is becoming one of my series. The first case discussed in the suppressed files, of course, is the Oklahoma City bombing. And we have a simple framework for this series. What does the record show? And what did the record miss? Now, such cases, the Oklahoma City bombing deserves careful, sober re-examination, not to inflame, but to clarify. History demands scrutiny. Closure doesn't equal comprehension, not by a long shot. There's still as many questions unanswered in the Oklahoma City bombing case as were answered. If you ask a prosecutor, he's going to say, well, we did it through the preponderance of the evidence. That doesn't mean the evidence was complete. Look at all the pages that they admitted they didn't turn over to the defense. What routes could have been found in all those pages that could have perhaps showed the other conspirators? 2 or 3 guys did not put this together and carry it out. There was more to the story. I remain convinced of that. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll start a new topic tomorrow. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening.